There is a particular kind of panic that arrives in your 50s, and it does not arrive the way you expect. It does not arrive as a crisis. It arrives as a quiet question, usually on a Sunday evening, usually while you're doing something completely ordinary like loading the dishwasher or staring at a fridge you have not cleaned out in 8 months. The question is it too late? Not too late to build wealth. Not too late to retire comfortably. Not too late in the dramatic sense. Too late in the quieter sense. The sense that you have spent 30 years earning money, and somehow the financial life you were supposed to have by now is still sitting somewhere over the horizon, and the horizon is no longer moving toward you at the speed it used to. If you have ever felt that, you are not imagining it, and you are not alone. Meet Margaret. Margaret is 53, earns $94,000 a year, and has spent the last 3 decades doing almost everything right by the standards of the world around her. She got the jobs, she paid the bills, she raised the kids, she contributed to the retirement account when she remembered, and sometimes when she did not. From the outside, Margaret looks like a woman who has her life together. From the inside, Margaret has a number she has never said out loud, and the number is this. She has roughly $61,000 saved for retirement. That is not nothing, but it is not enough, and she knows it. And the knowing is what has started to keep her up at night. Because Margaret is 53, which means she has roughly 12 to 15 years before she thought she would retire, and the math she has never actually run is starting to feel like a wall she is walking toward with her eyes closed. Here is the first thing to understand about your 50s. Your 50s are not the decade of starting over. Your 50s are the decade of catching up before the runway ends. And the difference between those two things is everything. Most people in their 50s think they need to start over, that the gap between where they are and where they should be is so wide that the only solution is a dramatic reset. That is wrong. The gap is real. But the solution is not a reset. The solution is a sequence. A sequence of specific milestones that, hit in order, can compress 3 decades of financial progress into a single decade. And almost none of those milestones are the ones you have been told to chase. Here are the real money milestones to accomplish in your 50s, and why each one matters more than anything you were told to focus on in your 30s or 40s. Milestone 1. The brutal honesty calculation. This is the milestone nobody wants to hit, and it is the one that makes every other milestone possible. Most people in their 50s have never actually calculated their number. Not a fantasy number, not, I want to be a millionaire. The actual number their investments would need to reach to cover their real lifestyle without them working. They have a vague sense of enough, a vague sense of secure, a vague sense of the point at which I can finally stop. And that vagueness is what produces the Sunday evening panic, because you cannot hit a target you have never defined, and you cannot relax into a finish line you have never measured. Margaret spent an evening doing the calculation she had avoided for 20 years. She took her actual annual living expenses, not the fantasy version, not the once the kids are grown version, but the real number based on the last 12 months of spending. She divided it by a safe withdrawal rate of roughly 4%, and she got a number. For her, it was around $720,000. That number was further away than she wanted, but the moment it existed on paper, something shifted. Not because the gap was smaller than she thought, because the gap was finally defined, and a defined gap can be closed. An undefined gap just produces anxiety. That is the first milestone of your 50s, knowing the number, not hitting the number, knowing it. Because the moment you know it, every financial decision for the next decade has a context it did not have before. Milestone 2. Maxing out the catch-up contributions. Here's the part almost nobody talks about, and it is the part that can change everything for someone in their 50s. If you are 50 or older, the IRS allows you to contribute more to your retirement accounts than younger people can. These are called catch-up contributions, and they are exactly what they sound like. A structured, tax-advantaged way to accelerate your wealth building. In the years when you need it most, for 2026, If you are 50 or older, you can contribute up to $31,000 to a 401k. You can contribute $8,000 to an IRA. That is tens of thousands of dollars of tax advantage space every year, designed specifically for people in Margaret's position. And most people in their 50s are not using it. Not because they cannot afford to, because they do not know it exists. Or they know, but they have never run the math on what maxing it out actually produces over a decade. Margaret started maxing out her contributions at 53. She was not able to hit the full limit immediately. She worked up to it over 2 years, redirecting raises and cutting lifestyle spending that had crept up without her noticing. By 55, she was contributing the maximum, and over the next 10 years, those contributions, combined with the growth of the money already in the account, closed a gap she had spent 2 decades pretending was not there. That is the second milestone, using the catch-up space the system literally built for you. Milestone 3. Eliminating all non-mortgage debt. This sounds like a milestone from your 30s. It is not. In your 50s, debt becomes a different kind of problem. It is no longer just a cost. It is a weight that sits on your monthly cash flow and limits your ability to redirect money toward the gap you are trying to close. Margaret had a car loan, a small home equity line she had used for a renovation 7 years ago, and a credit card balance that hovered around $3,800 and never quite went to zero. None of those debts were catastrophic, but together they were costing her roughly $900 a month in payments. That is $900 a month that could have been going into the catch-up space she was not yet using. That is $10,800 a year. Over a decade, that is roughly $108,000 of contributions, not counting growth, that were going to banks instead of to her future. Margaret spent 18 months eliminating every non-mortgage debt she had. She did not do it with a dramatic gesture. She did it with a sequence. She paid off the credit card first because it had the highest interest rate and the lowest balance. Then the car loan. Then the home equity line. And the moment the last one was cleared, her monthly cash flow opened up in a way she had not experienced in 20 years. That is the third milestone. Removing the weights that are quietly dragging your monthly cash flow away from the gap you are trying to close. Milestone 4. The Healthcare Bridge Plan. This is the milestone nobody wants to think about, and it is the one that catches more people in their 50s than almost anything else. Most people assume Medicare starts at 65 and that the gap between retirement and 65 is something they will figure out when they get there. The gap is expensive, and it is getting more expensive. If Margaret retires at 62, she has 3 years before Medicare kicks in. 3 years of private health insurance, which for a couple in their early 60s can easily run $1,500 to $2,000 a month. That is $54,000 to $72,000 over 3 years. Money that has to come from somewhere. And if that somewhere is her retirement account, it means withdrawing money she was counting on to grow. That is not a plan. That is a slow leak. The fourth milestone is building a specific, separate reserve for the healthcare bridge years. Not inside the retirement account. Not inside the emergency fund. A dedicated bucket, labeled clearly, funded deliberately, sitting in a high-yield savings account, waiting for the 3 years it will be needed. Margaret started building this at 54. She did not know the exact number yet, because healthcare costs shift. But she knew the rough shape of it, and she knew that pretending it was not coming was not a strategy. That is the fourth milestone, not being surprised by the thing everyone knows is coming. Milestone 5. A retirement date, not a retirement vibe. This is the milestone that changes the feeling, and it is the one almost nobody hits. Most people in their 50s have a vague sense of retirement as a vibe, a feeling, a someday, a when I am ready. But they have never attached a date to it, and without a date, the milestone does not exist. It is just a mood. Margaret spent an evening doing something she had never done. She picked a date. Not because she had to retire then, because the date gave the math a finish line. The moment the date existed, every calculation had a denominator. How much do I need? How much do I have? How much time do I have to close the gap? Without the date, those questions float. With the date, they answer themselves. Margaret picked 64, not 65 because she wanted a buffer, not 62 because the math was not there yet. 64 gave her 11 years of catch-up contributions, 11 years of growth, and a clear runway to work with. And the moment the date was on paper, the Sunday evening panic changed. Not because the gap was closed, because the gap had a deadline, and the deadline was achievable. That is the fifth milestone, turning a vibe into a date. Milestone 6, the what would I actually do conversation. This is the milestone that sounds soft and is actually the hardest one. Most people in their 50s have spent decades defining themselves by their work. Their identity is built around the job, the title, the routine, the sense of being needed, and they have spent almost no time asking what they would actually do if the work stopped. That is not a small question. It is the question that determines whether retirement feels like freedom or like a void. Margaret realized, sitting at her kitchen table, that she had no answer. She knew what she was retiring from. She had no idea what she was retiring to. And that gap, the identity gap, not the money gap, is what produces the depression, the drift, and the slow decline that people associate with retirement. Not the money. The lack of a next. The sixth milestone is not financial. It is the conversation with yourself about what the money is actually for. Because the money is not the goal. The life the money buys is the goal. And if you have not defined the life, the money will not fill the space. Margaret started small. She started thinking about the things she had put on hold for 30 years. The travel that was always someday. The hobbies that were always when I have time. The relationships that were always after the busy season. And she began to realize that the financial milestones she was chasing were not the point. They were the runway. The point was the life waiting at the end of the runway. And that life needed to be built before the money arrived, not after. That is the sixth milestone. Knowing what you are retiring to, not just what you are retiring from. Margaret is 56 now. She is not where she wants to be, but she knows where she is going. Her number is defined. Her catch-up contributions are maxed. Her non-mortgage debt is gone. Her healthcare bridge is being built. Her date is on the calendar. And her what next is taking shape. From the outside, Margaret looks like a woman in her mid-50s who is finally getting serious about money. From the inside, Margaret feels like a woman who finally has a map. And the map is what changed the feeling. Not the money, the map. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, let me know in the comments which milestone you are closest to, and which one you have been avoiding. And subscribe if you want more videos that treat money like the life story it actually is. Because most people in their 50s are not as far behind as they think. They just have never had the map.